Spooky. The funny thing is, I'm not even all that into Halloween as a holiday, but for some reason this season, I really fancy reading some genuinely spooky and unsettling fiction and just getting into the spirit of the season that way. I don't know, like, do you ever get into reading really spooky stuff around this time of year? And I'm curious, what is the scariest thing you feel like you've ever read? Because when I think of this question, the first book that comes to my mind is the novel The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy. And there's a particular scene in this novel where the father and son go to this subterranean basement area, and it is just terrifying. I really vividly remember reading it for the first time, and I don't know if it was just the atmosphere or the mood I was in. I think it was late at night, and I read that scene, and I was just horrified and actually had to stop reading it. This is like never happened, I don't think, before when I've read a book and been so unsettled by something that I've been reading that I have to actually stop reading it. But yeah, I'd be really curious to know, like, if you've ever had that experience or what is the most terrifying thing you've ever read. Please let me know about it in the comments below. But yeah, since I'm kind of in this mood to read some sort of scarier fiction, I thought I would go through my shelves and pick out some books and make a TBR pile for myself that I want to read. So I picked out 7 books that I hope to read over this season and, sort of set the mood and stay up late at night and just read under a cozy blanket with a big mug of hot chocolate. And I always use Green and Black's hot chocolate. I feel like their hot chocolate is the best. But anyway, yeah, I'm just going to go through these 7 books and talk about why I'm so keen to read them and why I think they're especially good for this season. And all of these books, I think, involve either ghosts or spirits in some way, and so I just think they'll be well suited for this time of year. So the first book is actually a classic novel that was reprinted recently called Lolly Willowes by Sylvia Townsend Warner. And Sylvia Townsend Warner was an English author of the early 20th century. I've read some of her fiction before, and it's really interesting. She has like quite a different point of view than I think any other writer at the time, and she wrote about a diverse array of subjects, but why this book seems so appropriate for this time of year is because it involves a young woman who is sort of quiet and unassuming, and she moves from London to the English countryside to explore witchcraft, and nobody expects this of her. And so she reveals herself to be more than what people expect of her, and I just love the sound of that story. And look at this cover. I mean, can you think of a more sort of autumnal, sort of Halloween typey cover? I'd also like to read some more short stories this season, because I feel like I haven't read all that many short stories recently. So I have a few collections that I want to keep by the bedside, and that I'll probably read some of these aloud to my partner, and hopefully he'll read some aloud to me. As I talked about, we really like to do this together. It's a nice thing to do together as a couple, and like especially nice thing to do before bedtime. Although maybe some of these stories will be so scary, then it'll be difficult to go to sleep. But anyway, the first book of short stories is a brand new collection called Dead Relatives by Lucie McKnight Hardy. And the title story of this collection is about a young woman that is left at home with the servants and a woman called Mammy. And when the ladies return to the house, things start to get a bit unhinged. And the other stories in this collection concern things like the fragility of the body and motherhood and small town tensions and metamorphosis. And they're supposed to be stories in fiction that involve a lot of tension tension and suspense, which is exactly what I want at this time of year. The Whispering Trees by Abubakar Adam Ibrahim, who's a Nigerian writer, and these are short stories which are set in northern Nigeria, and in a lot of them, myth and reality blend in a way that sounds really enticing, and I love fiction that does that takes mythology and brings it into the current world. So I think some of the stories involve political dissidents and widows, and there's a spirit that takes the form of a flock of white butterflies. Then there is Other Worlds by the writer Teffi, who is another author of the early 20th century, but she was Russian, and she was writing at a really interesting time in history, and that's sort of reflected in her fiction, where Orthodox Christianity is blended with the house spirits of ancient mythology and ancient Russian mythology, and I think that sounds so enticing and interesting to show those two things sort of brushing up against each other. And so yeah, these stories involve, there's a story about a girl that persistently hears a church bell, and so then resolves to become a saint herself. And there's a newly married couple that become convinced that their maid is a witch. And so yeah, it involves sort of spirits and spooky things like this, and I think it'll be a great collection to explore. And then speaking of ghosts, there's a recent novel called Ghosted by Jen Ashworth, and this is subtitled A Love Story because the story is about a woman whose husband goes missing one day, and she doesn't report him going missing for quite some time, and so the police become suspicious about why did it take her so long to report him being missing. And so it's the mystery of his disappearance, but also she starts to feel a presence in their apartment, and is this her husband or is it some other sort of spirit? And yeah, I just think that sounds so enticing, and this has one of the most beautiful covers that I've seen so far this year, so it's hard not to be drawn to it. Next I have the novel The Ghost of Frederic Chopin by Eric Faye, and it's translated from the French by Sam Taylor. And this takes place in Prague in the mid-90s, and it concerns a journalist who is he's assigned to make a documentary about a middle-aged woman that has no musical talent or training, and she suddenly starts composing this music because she claims to have been visited by the spirit of Frederic Chopin. And so yeah, it's the question about, like, is this a hoax or did this really happen? But I think it sounds like such an intriguing story that yeah, I'm just really keen to read this. And finally, there's the novel Bitterhall by Helen McClory, who's a Scottish writer, and she's such a good writer. I think she's really underrated and more people ought to read her. I've read some of her short stories, and which are really creepy in a very like genuine way, but also really psychologically fascinating, and that's the type of fiction that I really respond to and love. And so this novel actually takes place around Halloween, so it's sort of perfect for this time of year. And it concerns a group of flatmates, and they have an interwar themed Halloween party where they hold a seance and read diaries from a gentleman who may not be entirely dead. And I think they kind of summon a spirit, which then leads to a whole series of events, including a sort of longed-for sexual encounter and a moment of possession, which changes all of their lives. And so, yeah, I think this sounds like absolutely perfect for this time of year. So those are all the books that I'm hoping to get to this season. Let me know if you've read any of these and would also recommend them, or recommend I get to any of these before others, or if you have any other spooky reads that you're hoping to get to this season. But yeah, I'd also really like to know, what is the most terrifying moment you can think of in any fiction you've read? Please let me know about that in the comments below. I hope you have a good spooky season, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.